in Washington, D.C.
It's just a matter of timing. The president will be making a very important announcement with respect to the integrity of our elections. However, it is also very possible at the top of the speech he will mention the current situation with Iran and also the economy as well.
Tonight, the president's speech. President Trump promising really big news in his primetime address tonight. Will he make the most of this moment heading into the midterms? Democratic Senator Chris Muprhy weighs in with Bloomberg. Also ahead, our conversation with Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito. Plus, Iran's red line. The new warning tonight from Tehran on the Strait of Hormuz as U.S. Central Command announces a new wave of strikes for a fifth straight night. And follow the prompter, not you. President Trump's teleprompter operator under investigation this evening, accused now of pocketing thousands by betting on Trump's speeches, including the State of the Union address, with insider information. How the White House is responding, coming up. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew, alongside Kaylee Lyons.
And, Joe, we begin with the president just hours away from giving an address to the nation that the White House says will focus on election integrity and could touch on Iran, with the U.S., as you mentioned, today launching a fifth day of strikes around the Strait of Hormuz, driving crude above $85 a barrel. For more, Bloomberg's Courtney Subramanian is joining us live from the North Lawn of the White House. Courtney, if we could begin on this speech, how much of it is going to be about relitigating the 2020 election?
Well, a lot, it seems. Normally on days that a president is due to give a major speech to the American people, we don't typically hear from the White House press secretary, but that was not the case today. Caroline Leavitt returned to the podium for the first time since maternity leave to preview this speech and really plead her case as to why he's giving it. Now, she said he'll cover the subject of election integrity. He'll declassify documents, she said, pertaining to the 2020 election. Now, of course, we know the president has long pushed unproven claims about his loss to Joe Biden in 2020. And a 2021 National Intelligence report found no indication that there was foreign influence. But Caroline said to reporters today that we'll hear new evidence from the president. I think timing is really important to remember here. The president is trying to pressure Republicans to pass the Save America Act, which would impose new restrictions on American voters ahead of the midterms, which, of course, the Republicans will try and retain their majorities in Congress. And it also comes as the U.S. has launched more attacks on Iran, which, as you mentioned, Caroline said the president may address tonight in his remarks.
Yeah, this has been framed as a bit of a grab bag of issues. Courtney, I suspect that we might get an update with another round of strikes today. I'd like to ask you about this teleprompter operator, though. This is someone who had been working with the president, we understand, since 2016, called out for insider trading by Kalshi. I know this came up in the briefing today. Has he been fired?
Caroline said at the president's order, he was placed on administrative leave as this investigation plays out. She did call this unfortunate. She called it a disgrace. As you mentioned, he has been with the president since 2016, but it is the first time someone within the White House has been investigated for using confidential information in these fast-growing prediction markets. And it raises a lot of questions just about how widespread this practice is. Now, we've questioned the White House on this for months. There was a memo that went out in March to employees warning them about using confidential information in these prediction markets. But it's unclear just how much more the White House will investigate it itself or whether the DOJ is involved.
Courtney, thank you. Live from the White House, Courtney Subramanian with us on Bloomberg. Thank you for your reporting. As we mentioned, the U.S. launching fresh strikes against Iran, aiming to further degrade Iranian military capabilities, according to CENTCOM, and Iran responding to that earlier bombardment by firing at American bases in Kuwait and Jordan. This is where we started our conversation today with Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito of West Virginia, who chairs the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works, starting with the conflict with Iran. Listen.
Well, I think what we're trying to do and what the president is trying to do is find an honest broker in Iran to have a genuine peace agreement. We had a memorandum of understanding that Iran broke from the get-go and starts bombing neighbors and interrupting ships in the Strait. And so I think the president's trying to say to them, we mean business here. We want to have commerce moving. We want to have peace. And maybe this is the only language they understand, is that we are going to be forceful until we get that in. But I don't believe this is going to be all-out war. I think we're wending our way to an end, but it's taking longer than I think everybody would like.
Well, are there any limits, Senator, in your mind on the course of action the president should consider in the name of getting Iran back to the negotiating table and being a more honest broker, to use your language? As there's been reporting that he is at least considering committing ground troops, seizing Karg Island, for example. Would you be supportive of such measures?
I think the course of which is to sort of, solidify the conditions at the Strait is probably number one. And I think he's moving towards that. I don't think there's an appetite in this country, and probably not for the president, to have ground troops anywhere on or near that in an aggressive way or in an offensive way. So I don't think that's going to be something that the American public, certainly I don't support that. But I do support a fair and equitable end to this that ends the nuclear weapons, that lets the free flow of commerce through the Straits, and that lets the full development develop in Iran, so we can then have a peaceful agreement.
Well, at the moment, as long as this is brewing here, Senator, you don't need me to tell you that it's sending oil prices higher. It's pretty wild to see $85 Brent today. We've got crude just below WTI, $80. The price for a gallon of gas is $3.94 today. I know you're doing a little bit better in your state. I think it was $3.79. But I wonder if these rising prices for petro products is actually good news for coal in West Virginia.
I don't think rising energy prices, gas prices, oil prices are good anywhere, because the price of oil, it impacts the price of food, transportation. I don't have to tell you all the different aspects that this bleeds into, but I think the most difficult part of this is for the regular West Virginian who's trying to drive through and sees that ticking up by a dime, 20 cents, 25 cents every day, and in some case every hour, when it was coming down pretty dramatically when we thought we had a ceasefire. So I think this is going to be a big impetus for the president and for the American people to say, we can't tolerate these high gas prices. We want a full-out coal industry and a natural gas industry, but I think in this case, it needs to rise. All boats need to rise together in the energy space.
Well, something else, of course, that is rising is the national debt and deficit, and perhaps it could even more so if a third reconciliation bill passes, Senator. What the House is putting forward, $95 billion, that is not offset. Does that reconciliation package, which of course includes funding for the Pentagon to fund the war, have a chance of getting through the Senate? Would it get your vote?
Well, at first, we're going to have to see what happens in the House to see if it can actually get through there. I do know that there's a natural hesitation, and I have it myself, to keep putting unpaid for items and the billions and billions of dollars on the American people's back. But we have to look at what we've seen in terms of appropriations. It's non-functioning. The Democrats will not cooperate with this, so we can't exactly say what the Department of War is going to be able to have to spend. And I think it's important that we maintain strong military and that we fully fund our defense. So, there are pushes and pulls here. But I'm going to wait and reserve whether I would support that until we see what the House can do. I do believe that certain elements of it I'm very much in favor of, but certainly I would be looking for offsets. That is no question about that.
There's a question about how this might play if the Save America Act was not part of it, and I realize it's still unclear exactly how the parliamentarian might rule and what parts of Save America might be included. The president's going to be talking about this tonight, we understand, in his primetime address, Senator. And, of course, John Thune has said repeatedly that the votes are not there. Is this a huge time waster for you as an appropriator or as a senator trying to pass anything?
Well, I think as I've heard the leader say, John Thune say numerous times, it's a numbers game. And you need to have, 51 members that are going to vote. I support the Save America Act. I want to see voter ID and proof of citizenship and all the good things that are in this bill. But quite simply, we do not have the votes in the United States Senate. We do not have the votes in the United States Senate to break a filibuster and make it just a 50-vote threshold. So you have two big blockades to being able to fully implement this. And, the reality here is that's the reality. And so I think what we need to do is start looking at things like we did with housing and look at more affordability, or like I'm doing with permitting and get more permitting and easier permitting so we can build. I mean, there's lots of other things that we need to spend our time on instead of kind of bashing our heads against the wall to trying to achieve a result that in the end we're not going to be able to get there.
So would the president, Senator, be better served to spend his time addressing the nation in prime time this evening, talking about those issues like affordability rather than relitigating the 2020 election?
Well, as you know, with this president, he's going to address the nation and talk on the topics that he wants to talk about. He feels very impassioned about the Save America Act, and so do we all here in terms of how it translates to safe elections. So I think for me to tell the president what to talk about would be a little on the a wasted effort for me. And so I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. I'll be tuned in. But this issue of affordability and the American people living with uncertainty is something that the president realizes, and hopefully he'll address some of that tonight.
Well, I'm curious to ask you about sanctions. I don't know if that's on his agenda to speak about this evening, Senator, but we understand President Trump has decided to back the late Senator Lindsey Graham's Russia sanctions bill, although he is calling for some changes, for instance, adding Iran and Hezbollah. Do you see this bill getting passed by this Congress, and would it carry Lindsey Graham's name?
Well, I hope it would carry his name, because that was his final thought, I think, almost as he was visiting with Zelensky in Ukraine, to put the ultimate pressure on Russia. He had been trying to work this bill all the way through. I'm a co-sponsor of the bill. I'm a co-sponsor of the new bill. There have been 60 co-sponsors. We're at the magic number here with the Russia sanctions bill. So we need to pass this. We need to put the ultimate pressure. The Ukrainian people have had our help. They still need our help. But ultimately, Russia needs to walk away from this, and they need to walk away from it weakened and wounded. And I think sanctions can help us do that.
And finally, Senator, to end it on a domestic note, though this does also relate to our neighbors in the north. From New York and here in Washington, we'll feel it tomorrow. We're seeing smoke and unsafe air conditions stemming from wildfires in Canada. And I wonder, as the chair of the committee, if you have any recourse on this situation or to avoid situations like it in the future, as this is not the first time the U.S. has felt the effect of raging wildfires up north.
Well, that's an interesting topic, because we are looking at that in our committee. We are trying to get to a point where bipartisan we can do much more forest management, controlled burns, to be able to manage the forest to prevent these large and devastating forest fires. Obviously, it's a health issue. It's a healthy issue for our forest, and so hopefully, we don't have it over the threshold here, but we will also be devoting, I'm sure, monies and our EPA resources to make sure to advise people when to go out, how to go out, and when the air is clear enough and safe for them to breathe, and that people with certain conditions probably should remain inside while that passes. But this has happened in my home state, where the smoke has come in from Canada, and it is a very, it's scary, yes, particularly for younger people and older people. But we do have, I think, a will with Senator Curtis and Senator Kelly to be able to remedy this situation on a national basis.
All right. The chairwoman of the Environment and Public Works Committee, Senator Shelley Moore Capito, the Republican from West Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us on Bloomberg TV.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon. Thank you.
And we appreciate the senator joining us from Capitol Hill as we turn from the Capitol to Wall Street, which today saw a sell-off in chip makers drag down stocks overall in the session with their losses. And after hours, Netflix shares are sinking on disappointing results. So let's get into all of this now as we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Nora Melinda, who joins live from World Headquarters in New York. Nora, tough day for a lot of tech chips in particular.
Tough day on Wall Street. We did actually see more stocks higher than lower in the S&P 500, almost 370 stocks higher in the green. But we did see major indexes, of course, weighed down and pressured by big tech companies, specifically looking at the chip makers. We saw the S&P 500 off by about 0.5%. The Nasdaq 100, though, seeing a bit of a deeper plunge, lower by 1.6%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average actually doing the best out of the three, lower by just 0.2%. But we really saw a lot of pressure after we got some results out of TSMC. So we did see the chip maker reporting not only solid results for the quarter, but also a strong outlook. But what really concerned investors on Wall Street is about the massive spending, especially as we think about all the underlying concerns about the massive spending on the AI build out. And that's what you saw, not only pressuring TSMC, but also ricocheting into the U.S. market as we look at how ADRs performed and a lot of the other names like Broadcom lower. We also saw NVIDIA as the biggest weight in the S&P 500 index. So we did see these solid results really being overshadowed by the anxiety about the AI spend. And that is really what drove the narrative here on Wall Street today.
After hours, Nora, what happened to Netflix and chill? It's fallen out of bed.
Well, we did see Netflix actually forecasting a second quarter of slowing growth. So you are seeing that pressuring shares in the after hours trade. The stock off by nearly 9% in the post market. And this is after we did see not only the forecast about a second quarter of slowing growth, but we also did see that time spent watching Netflix grew by just about 2% since the first half of the year. So you did see a lot of eyeballs being taken away to the Winter Olympics. You also saw, of course, the World Cup that's still ongoing. So Netflix still trying to grapple with getting people coming back, and we want to see more growth. And that's at least what investors are thinking here on Wall Street. So you're seeing them dissecting that, along with, of course, the pressures coming off of that M&A activity that they were looking at before with Warner Brothers Discovery. So we'll see where the stock goes, but currently down about more than 40% over the past 12 months.
Wow. I guess I better start catching up on my shows. Visceral reaction after hours. Nora, thank you. Bloomberg's Nora Melinda live in New York. Coming up, the escalating conflict between the U.S. and Iran continues to roil global leaders after CENTCOM began striking Iran again a short time ago. While financial moves in Russia could point to Vladimir Putin's waning grip on power. We'll hear about this from Senator Chris Murphy, member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. But that's New York. If you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube, can you see the Statue of Liberty? It's there. That's our shot of the Statue of Liberty, engulfed by smoke from wildfires in Canada. An estimated 64 million Americans suffering through high temperatures and breathing extremely unhealthy air. There's a shot of the New York skyline. If you're with us on Bloomberg Radio, picture Blade Runner, maybe Beijing on a bad day. And we know that it's coming here. It's going to be in Washington, D.C. tomorrow, and another plume coming to New York later in the week. As the president prepares to deliver remarks from the White House tonight, pre-smoke plume, Democrats are pushing back against his claims of election interference, much as they are against the president's war with Iran. Bloomberg's David Gura spent time today at the Aspen Security Forum with Democratic Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, talked about the president's speech tonight and the latest round of strikes against Iran. Listen.
This is the most significant foreign policy disaster in the last 20 years. Iran effectively has control of the Strait. They are going to have control of the Strait for the long run. As a price of opening that Strait, they want all of the sanctions released, which is going to put a lot of new money into their economy, but also allow them to send money out to their proxy groups in the region. This war should have never started. It's hard to figure out what to do now because it's kind of like asking somebody, now that the raw egg is splattered over the floor, floor, how do you put it back together? But it seems as if the United States is going to have to pay that VIG, billions of dollars to Iran in sanctions relief, and we're going to have to prevail upon the Israelis to permanently stop the war with Lebanon. And if those two things happen, maybe we can get that strait reopened. I have no confidence that ultimately there's going to be any bigger deal between the United States and Iran. I don't think they're going to make any commitments on a nuclear program. So I guess the best we can ask for right now is to just stop the shooting, get the strait reopened, and we're still seemingly a far away from that.
As we look at Humpty Dumpty there on the floor, do you think the administration gets that? Are they still confident that they can stare down Iran, I guess, and find some solution by doing that?
Yeah, I think we sort of can't overhype the degree that just plain old incompetence plays in this story. I mean, the Trump administration doesn't know what it's doing. Its primary diplomats with Iran are the president's son-in-law and a guy who was a real estate developer 2 seconds ago who's never done diplomacy. So it's not surprising that they're failing. They're going to either have to put actual adults, like experienced diplomats, in charge, or they're just going to have to step out of the way and ask our European friends or our Gulf friends to come in and, try to seal an ultimate deal on reopening the strait. So I have very little confidence that this crowd that's in charge of our national security is going to be able to get anything done.
We've seen in recent weeks your colleagues on the other side of the aisle, many of them expressing more reservations about this. Do you detect a real change kind of in their position as this is attenuated, as it plays out?
I mean, this is, of course, a deeply unpopular war. The American people don't support the war. They want it to end, and they're paying the price, not just in higher gas prices and higher diesel prices and higher fertilizer prices, but also in the cost to the budget. This is $100 billion to $200 billion. And what is going to happen is that Republicans are going to cut funding for schools, for transportation, for nutrition, in order to pay for the war. That's part of the reason that the American public don't want it. So as you get closer to the election, this becomes an issue that Republicans are going to have to deal with, because this will be an issue where voters are going to say, are you for the war or against it? And it's going to matter in their choices. So yes, I expect that you will get more Republicans saying, time to end the war. For the first time ever, about 3 weeks ago, we passed a resolution in the Senate to end the war. It ultimately was stymied by some procedural moves in the Senate, but there is evidence that Republicans are starting to wake up.
You mentioned Israel a moment ago, and I go back to that memo of understanding, which it seems was not worth the paper that it was printed on. I think the president would agree with that now. Israel, of course, not a party to those conversations, and I'm curious how you look at the U.S.'s power to persuade Israel to scale back, pull back its campaign in Lebanon, and change tack.
I think you'll have to use the leverage that we have, and the leverage that we have is our defense relationship. So long as Israel believes that the Trump administration is going to continue to feed them the weapons and the intelligence that they need to carry out war on Lebanon, they're going to continue to carry out that war. That's a very blunt tool. It took me a long time to accept it as a tool to try to influence their behavior in Gaza. But if it is a precondition to getting the strait open, then we have to consider using that tool, because as long as the strait is closed, it is American citizens, families, that are bearing the cost.
7 o'clock local time, 9 o'clock Eastern time, the president's going to give a speech to the nation and reportedly will focus on the 2020 election and election irregularities as he sees them. I'll ask you if you're going to tune into that, but more broadly here, what's the message of that and the danger of it as you might see it in him continue to espouse what we know not to be true?
Well, the danger is that we, for the first time in American history, don't have a free election. I don't know what the president is going to recommend, but if he is trying to build the case to put troops out in the polling places, he will likely be stopped by the Supreme Court, and then we will see whether our democracy collapses and he does not listen to the decision of the Supreme Court. This is a really dangerous moment, and I'm really worried that so many of my Republican colleagues are quiet about it.
Democratic Senator Chris Murphy in conversation with David Gura, and we'll have more on the president's speech tonight ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Strange things happened with an election, and I didn't get to serve the 4 years that I was supposed to serve. I don't want to say it. I don't want to be controversial. The election was rigged. And we came back and we did something very special, and I ended up getting the Olympics and getting FIFA.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And that was President Trump back in May, reiterating his belief that the 2020 election was, quote, rigged, despite presenting no evidence to support that claim. It's an assertion he's made more than 100 times, at least in the first 6 months of this year alone, according to Reuters. And he could raise it again in a primetime speech tonight that the White House says will focus on election integrity. The latest poll from The Economist and YouGov last month found that a majority of those surveyed believed the 2020 election was not rigged, though half of Republicans think it was. So let's go now to this week's edition of The Debrief with Mario Parker, who's here in our Washington bureau. So, Mario, obviously it is no secret to anyone that the president does have a fixation with the 2020 election. To what extent is it personal versus political, in that this is also a subject that revs up his base?
Well, it's very personal, Kaylee. I remember quite vividly that post-November 2020 time period as the president tried very hard to relitigate that election, to fight for the results, all the way up into the culmination that we saw on January 6th of 2021 as well. I was also on the plane with the president as he launched his presidential campaign to come back, when there were worries about a concern among Republicans as to whether or not his heart was in it. And my reporting at the time showed that his heart was in it, but he continued to. I know we showed the graphic from Reuters on the first 6 months of this year, but I mean, for the last 5.5 years or so, he's said this. This is something that's deeply personal to him, that he lost the election to Joe Biden. This is an election that had been litigated again as well. No claim, no evidence of any malfeasance at all. And so when I speak to Republicans here in Washington and in some of the states as well, they tell me they don't see much good coming from this. Even as 50% of the party may have some doubts about it, one Republican strategist I called down to Georgia just to get a sense, given that that's ground zero for a lot of these claims. And this person told me even if a voter feels like they got a raw deal, they've by and large moved on by now. The president lost the 2020 election fair and square. He won the 2024 election fair and square, is what strategists say. And they want to keep the House and the Senate in the 2026 midterm election.
Well, so when we consider these midterm elections in the year 2026, is this what Republicans want to be talking about?
Oh, no, not at all. Because one of the things, as you know, Kaylee, is that this is also putting pressure and continuing to strain the relationship between the president, John Thune, and Senate Republican leadership, who, in order to pass this Save America Act that the president has been championing, would have to do away with the filibuster. The concern among Republicans, when we speak to them here in Washington, is that what happens when the shoe gets on the other foot, proverbially, right? When Democrats take control of those chambers as well. And what does that mean for the filibuster? What does that mean for other Washington norms?
Well, we actually spoke yesterday on Balance of Power with one Republican senator, Senator John Husted of Ohio. He was the Secretary of State in Ohio, so he has a bit of experience with how elections are run state to state. This is what he told us about election security.
We have 50 separate election systems in this country. They're run at the state and local level. In Ohio, we essentially have the Save America Act. We have photo ID. We do check to make sure that people are not in this country illegally and also on the voting rolls in our state.
And to his point, Mario, about having 50 separate election systems, how frustrated is the president that there is a limit to how he's able to influence elections from the executive office?
Well, he's very frustrated. He says that quite publicly as well. But, and what we saw here from the senator also, is that this goes back to states' rights versus federalism as well, right? So you can't pick and choose and cherry pick if you're the president as to which one you're going to have. And again, this is what you're hearing from whispers from many of the on the Hill among Republican senators, at least.
All right. Bloomberg's Mario Parker with this week's debrief. Thank you so much, Joe.
All right, Kaylee. Ahead of the president's address, we spoke with California's Attorney General Rob Bonta, whose state has been the focus of attacks by the president on how it runs its elections, about what he expects to hear from President Trump tonight.
Unfortunately, it's more wild-eyed conspiracy theories being advanced by the president of the United States. He lost the 2020 election. He lost the 2020 election. He lost the 2020 election. There's no other way to say it. And this is the person who tried to ask election officials in Georgia to find him more votes, so he could win when he lost.
And with reports the president is expected to address election security, specifically tonight's speech coming just 1 week since he fired 2 Democratic members of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. We talked about it when it happened. This is the organization tasked with helping states run accurate elections. A 3rd Republican member resigned. Now it's empty. Joining us now, one of those Democratic officials fired. Benjamin Hovland, former member of the Election Assistance Commission. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
So you were confirmed by the United States Senate by unanimous consent in 2019.
That's correct.
So why did you get fired?
You'd have to ask somebody else that question.
Did someone not tell you? Did you get a phone call? How did you find out?
Actually, I received about a 2-sentence email while I was in the airport waiting for a flight.
From whom?
From the White House Office of Personnel.
Well, it's incredible and obviously has personal consequences for you. But what of the consequences for the country and for our elections? The commission now sits empty ahead of the midterms.
Yeah, well, there's a great staff still in place, and they'll keep doing the work of the commission. The commissioner's role was really to set the agenda and set the policy. Now if something unforeseen comes up, which is certainly possible in elections, I know that my colleagues and I will be missed. But I think one of the real unfortunate aspects of this is the Election Assistance Commission was created to be an independent, bipartisan agency where you had 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans who had to work together. We had to find common ground. And while we didn't always agree, we did enough, and we found ways to support the men and women across the country who run our elections, those state and local election officials in communities around the country.
We've seen the president place a lot of loyalists at the top of different agencies. This could potentially be another. What would happen if we saw Trump loyalists be named to that commission? What type of destruction could be wrought?
Well, they're Senate-confirmed positions, so you still have the Senate's advise and consent role. But of course, again, one of the things that I've said over the years is that good election administration is not about politics. It's about good governance and customer service. And when you politicize election administration, at least half of the country starts to lose faith in the process, if not more. And again, we're at a time where we need to be encouraging Americans to participate, encouraging them to get involved in the process, and not undermining that faith.
Okay, well, so let's talk about some of the things the president has said that could potentially lead someone who was listening to him to believe that there are issues with our election system. We expect that in his speech tonight, he may suggest that there was foreign interference, not just with information around the election, but actual tampering with the voting systems. Did you ever see any evidence of that?
I didn't. And, one of the things that I've said consistently since November of 2020 and in the aftermath, the immediate aftermath of the election was no one cares more about the accuracy and integrity of our elections than the men and women who run our elections across the country. And if there's evidence, present that. And obviously there were all the court cases after 2020, and there was never anything. It was just rhetoric from a podium or at a press conference, and then in court, under oath, never any evidence. And again, now all these years later, we still haven't seen anything. So, I'll approach tonight with an open mind. But again, if you look at the track record, time and time again, we hear rhetoric and we don't see any evidence.
He claims that he will have newly declassified evidence, and there's reporting actually from Congressman Jim Hines, who wrote an op-ed, that the FBI director might be there. The current acting DNI might be there as well. The president talks a lot about mail-in ballots, absentee ballots. To what extent have you seen fraud in that space?
Again, so often people don't fully understand the safeguards and safety measures that are in place. And, in particular, if there are claims of vulnerabilities, all systems have vulnerabilities, but then you have strategies, you have layers of security to help prevent that. And so again, elections is no different from that. In fact, the election system is extremely complex with a lot of layers of security. And again, I'll believe it when I see it, but I've heard maybe this is a slight variation on the claims, but again, time and time again, even before 2020, going back to 2016, where the president claimed he won the popular vote and that there were non-citizens in California. He created a whole commission, the Pence-Kobach Commission. They didn't find anything. That was even further back. So again, there is a pattern of making claims and not delivering any evidence.
Well, just on non-citizens voting, that is at the very heart of the argument the president and Republican allies on the Hill are making as to why the Save America Act needs to pass, to have proof of citizenship. How many documented cases are you aware of non-citizens voting in elections across the country?
It's very few. It happens, and it's usually accidental or sad. Someone makes a mistake at a motor vehicle office, and someone who checked that they were not a citizen gets registered and makes a mistake. That person usually ends up being arrested and being deported. So they're awful stories. And again, but it is so rare. I mean, it is a handful of examples over the course of millions or billions of valid votes of American citizens. So, certainly something we should take serious, but not anywhere rising to the level of the many challenges that elections are facing.
Well, let's keep this lightning round going here a little bit. How about people voting in lieu of deceased relatives? How often does that happen?
You know where that happens the most often? Either one, people testing the system to try to prove they can. And again, those safeguards and safety measures catch those people because election officials, for example, do signature verification, and they look and they go, this isn't the signature we have on file. And so, again, that person tends to get a phone call or a visit from law enforcement potentially. And so, again, these are the types of safeguards that are in place throughout the election system. There is a significant accounting of all the ballots. And, if you've checked in, if you request a mail ballot, that's noted. So you can't show up at the polling place and get another one. Or if you did, it's a provisional ballot, and they see if your mail ballot was sent in. And so, again, those are the types of things that the average voter doesn't see, but election officials do every day to protect the security of our elections.
Well, and while you were still at the commission, how much were you hearing from election officials about ongoing concern about their physical safety and the physical safety of those who are voting, especially as we just heard this from Senator Muprhy as well, and suggestions that perhaps we could see troops deployed come November?
The physical security aspects have continued to be a challenge. Again, many of them as a result of the false and misleading information that we've seen about elections, particularly post-2020. And that has real consequences for the local officials who run elections in their communities across the country.
All right. Benjamin Hovland, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your insight. And still ahead, we'll have more on the president's teleprompter operator that allegedly cashed in betting on Trump's speeches. We're also monitoring the skies over New York City, blanketed by smoke from Canadian wildfires. Where the smoke is heading next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
The White House has extremely strict ethical guidelines with respect to issues like this, and as I just told you, this individual will no longer be here. He'll be on paid administrative leave. I'm sorry, without pay. The administrative leave is unpaid, to be very clear. That was a decision by the president, so I think that speaks for itself.
Welcome back to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Kaylee Lyons alongside Joe Matthew. And that was White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt today addressing a report that a White House teleprompter operator is under investigation by the CFTC for allegedly making wagers on Kalshi about President Trump's speeches, which, of course, he had access to as the teleprompter operator. Wow. And joining us now is our political panel, Democratic strategist Archie Siddiqui, founder and CEO of Bellwether Government Affairs, alongside Republican strategist Ashley Davis, partner at S3 Group. Welcome to you both. We have a lot we want to discuss with you, including the substance of the president's speech tonight, but I'm more curious about the person who will be delivering that speech to him on the teleprompter. It's not going to be this man who is reportedly under investigation. Ashley, and this is not the first instance we've seen in terms of moves that are dependent on the decision-making of this president and this administration, leading to some lucrative bets in prediction markets. How do we get a handle on it?
Well, one, I was saying he's probably very smart for doing this, but he's probably going to jail. But I do have to say that the military office at the White House does run the communication aspect of the president. So this is probably a career employee. I think you said he's been there since
2016.
2016, yeah. So, I mean, this isn't a political appointee. I don't think there's any conspiracy theory against the president, but yeah, this guy's in trouble.
Is our prompter operator making money that we don't know about here? We all seem to have this in common.
You do know the markets, right?
Yeah. Wait a second. Not at Bloomberg. We have a policy for that. Archie, does this require someone? By the way, every other lawmaker has a bill to ban prediction markets in their offices. Some of them include the executive branch as well. Is it time to get on with this?
I think this is a very active debate in Congress. At the same time, it's a new issue. It has come to the forefront with this administration because we've seen, remember the Venezuelan conflict, that was front and center.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of these conflicts of interest issues, they go from the top in terms of when you work for a political elected. When I worked for Nancy Pelosi, it wouldn't even have occurred to me to do something like that, right? Whether you would go to jail or not, it just wasn't something that we would have explored. So I think part of this is, for Democrats, it is a pattern and practice with this administration, and that's why I think there is this continuous push on oversight. But on the prediction markets, this is an open question. I think we're going to see more debate, and as there are more and more examples of this, then we're going to see more of a push.
But I do agree with you. It comes from the top down, because every office, Republican or Democrat or whatever, you can't be in the office and predict. This is going to be a major issue. No, it is, and I don't have real faith in Congress that they'll be able to legislate on it.
Was he betting on the phone while the other hand was on the prompter? This is pretty wild stuff.
But how do you not tell your kid or to vote or to bet or your cousin and then you get the money? There's a whole thing.
Let's talk after.
No, well, when we talk about it, and you characterized it this way, Archie, this prediction market world is a new issue, something that is not a new issue. In fact, it's an issue 6 years old now as the results of the 2020 election, and yet we expect that is largely going to be what the president takes the opportunity to talk about when he speaks to the nation in prime time tonight about this wider issue of election integrity. What purpose does this ultimately serve in your mind, Archie?
In my mind, I think the president is very skilled on building a narrative and then creating a villain. In this case, it might be China or it might be another foreign government, and then pushing sometimes, often, a very unpopular policy stance he has over the finish line. So I think for Democrats, a lot of Democrats would say all roads lead back to the midterms. It's casting a looming shadow. We see, just think about last year. The president passes a landmark economic bill. Suddenly, he doesn't do his victory tour. He goes straight to mid-year redistricting. Now, a year later, we're 10 seats ahead in terms of the Republicans having a path to 10 additional seats in the midterms. Similarly, we've seen the SAVE Act come up over and over. So this very much might be part of building a narrative towards the elections in that constant drive. We just keep on seeing example after example, whether it's the USPS rule on absentee balloting, where the U.S. Postal Service would decide if you could get a mail-in ballot. So he's been very creative on this issue.
So is this about creating smoke cover for 2026, or is this about igniting the base, actually giving them something to get excited about with a couple of months to go before voting?
I think both, but I also would say I think this even goes back to 2016. This goes back to Russia. And was there foreign influence in this? So I'm not saying, listen, as a Republican right now, it's kind of like, okay, what is he going to say tonight? Is it a little bit cringeworthy? Yeah, and is it China? But I'm hearing Venezuela. There's going to be a lot of things about the machines and where they came from, and I don't know. We'll see.
And that's a base issue. Wow. The Venezuela rumor has been a MAGA issue, right?
Exactly, but I do think it's a combination, but I do agree. Listen, have we had dead voters in Philadelphia vote for 20 since I've been in politics? Absolutely, but is it ever enough that ever matters? No. And I do think that one thing we have to remember in this country, that democracy is the best thing that we have, and we can't undermine it. And so you do have a lot of Democrats right now saying, no matter what happens in the midterm, the president's going to say if we lose, it's going to be, this is why he's doing this. I don't know. I still think that he feels that he needs to be vindicated, but I'm not sure why.
Well, he also really wants to see the Save America Act pass.
Totally, yeah.
I'm sure he'll make that case. Is he going to be able to move the needle on just a simple math problem in the Senate?
Well, supposedly, I mean, listen, we don't know what's going to be said. I think it's being debated probably up until 8:59, but I don't know if the teleprompter guy is going to make any money. But I do think that we still don't have 51 votes in the Senate. We don't have 60 votes in the Senate to move the SAVE Act. And the parliamentarian, even if this gets into a bill that's, in Reconciliation 3.0 or whatever you want to call it, I still think it's going to be kicked out. So how do we make up those numbers? And I don't think there's any votes for the filibuster to be, to override the filibuster.
Just ask John Thune. He keeps saying it over and over again. I'm deeply curious about the optics here this evening. President will not be behind the Resolute desk, which he tends not to do in an address like these. He's chosen the East Room. Remember, he had a seated audience off camera for the last one. So he had some people, I guess, to vibe with in the room. But Congressman Jim Hines writing that Kash Patel's going to be there, Bill Pulte, maybe standing behind him, maybe presenting evidence. This would be a peculiar White House event in prime time. Has there ever been anything like it?
I feel like we've seen some of this in the Trump administration itself.
Yeah.
I mean, he likes an audience and he likes backup. So
props as well.
Yeah. And I think he's going to tell a good story. Let's see what it is. I don't know what it is.
It is going to be a good story, I think, because supposedly he's unclassifying a bunch of.
That's correct.
I don't know. Listen, I just don't. I think we need to worry about other things.
Well, there's also, in the White House press secretary Caroline Leavitt said this may come up, the issue of Iran, which is the last time he addressed the nation, was on that subject. Is it too late to make the case to the American people for the war now that we've been in it for months?
Absolutely not. We're in this war, and there's no clear end in sight. Honestly, I think for Democrats, the war funding effort was a real opportunity to ask questions and to basically course correct on what an exit looks like. And now that's in the Republicans' hands going forward because it'll be a Republican-only effort. And so the question is that if these Republicans who are concerned and who really need answers and who are worried about the story continuing to change constantly, if they don't ask for answers, then I think we'll continue to be in this war in some form or fashion.
There'll be a lot of different constituencies watching this tonight. When he gets to Iran, will the American people be the audience or the Iranian regime?
The Iranian regime. I don't know. I think most people, I was out of town last week in middle America, normal America, and no one's talking about this except for gas prices. If they go up again, there's all of that. But I think this is Iran because I think that the regime, and I'm very conservative on national security, but I think that the regime thinks they're going to wait him out on gas prices for the midterms, and I just don't think he cares. Wow. Which, in theory, from a national security perspective, he probably shouldn't.
We're going to find out together. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern.
I'll be sleeping.
You can hear it and see it right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Ashley Davis, Archie Siddiqui, thank you so much for the analysis and getting us ready for all of this as we get ready, Kaylee, for the smoke. You can't even see the Statue of Liberty tonight. You can't see half the skyline in New York, and we're told it's coming here. Look at this. If you're with us on Bloomberg Radio, don't worry. You can't see it anyway.
Yeah, the Statue of Liberty barely visible
see the outline
with that smoky haze. Air Now says New York City's air quality is very unhealthy. And as Joe said, it's coming down south to the district tomorrow. And we'll, of course, be back tomorrow to talk about that and post-game the president's speech right here on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Breathe deep.